And we're going to start broadcasting. 1, 2, 3. Welcome to the Digital Roundtable. Today is March 3rd. It's a fantastic day, beautiful, as I understand, across the plains and across the South and even in East Texas, where Llewelyn lives. Fantastic, and I'm looking forward to today's event and show. We have a great speaker, but to get us in the right mood, Dr. John Butler, will you carry the honors of starting your guitar?
Always now, nothing ever goes away. Everything is here to stay. There's always now.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So, John Butler, how are you today, sir? The weather and the health is good. Everything okay?
Health is good. I finished my second shot. Things are great. Wonderful weather. We are Texas, and we are getting beat up in the national news over masks. We're getting beat up in the national news over the grid. So we have a certain kind of pride that's being punctured. But within all of it, we know that there's a future, and we are preparing for the future. There is so much happening on the political scene. The cooperation has turned into competition, and people getting along with the vaccine, with the pharmaceuticals that's going to come together, to join together to create vaccines for all of us. We're looking at May, and that means lots of things are happening. So it's an interesting world. My students on Zoom are restless, and the entire year has been restless.
Yeah. Llewelyn, how are you today?
Very well. Up here in Rhode Island, which you call East Texas, which suggests a geographic challenge that you haven't quite mastered. It's sunny. Spring is coming, the best time of year. The grass is beginning to turn green. The snow is all melted, and it's pretty nice. And we're all hoping that we can get our second shots on time. I've got mine on Monday, and with a little luck, we can travel again.
There you go. There you go. Well, in our guest of honor today, Tom, how are you, sir?
I am well. I am well. It's wonderful to be here.
Excellent. Excellent. So to formally introduce you for the audience and those that will listen to our video in the future, Tom Deitrich is the president and CEO of Itron. And he, before Itron, had a phenomenal career in multiple companies. He was executive senior VP and VP at Freescale, what used to be Motorola semiconductor business, and now really part of NXP. And before that, he was also a senior VP and VP at Flextronics. Today, I think they go by the name of Flex, a company that pretty much invented contract manufacturing from nothing to 30 or something like that, billions of dollars a year. And then he also was a senior vice president at Sony-Ericsson, which was a joint venture between those two companies on the telecom space. He was a senior VP, director, project manager, engineer at Ericsson. And he actually started his career at GE of all places. So welcome, Tom. We're delighted to have you. We look forward to your insights and wisdom.
Well, thank you very much. It sounds way more impressive than it was in real time. I'm telling you, I fumbled from one place to the next, looking for interesting problems to solve, and suddenly here I am. So it's been a good ride. It really has.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So gentlemen, it seems like things are coming down a bit, even though the trend from week to week is up this week on death and on cases. The vaccines are dramatically improving, about 10 million new shots every week or so, actually 13.6 million this week. So it seems like we're going to be at 100 million in a couple of more weeks, which is a great thing. We're actually right now it's something like 78.6 million people that have gotten the vaccine. And so that's very encouraging. And the stock market seems to be hovering sideways in many ways, and little corrections here and there in the economy. One of the key alarming things to me is the price of oil continues to go up. Inflation is kind of looming, which is not a good thing. The price of gasoline has popped up another 20 cents. And I understand that the job market, the numbers for January are going to be, for February are going to be somewhat good. So John Butler, what's going on, the state of the affairs, the economy, the recovery? Do we got COVID under control? What are we looking like?
Well, let me first say to Tom, thanks for taking care of Freescale. It came out of, I was director of IC Square, and it was MetroWorks, and Motorola bought it from the Austin Technology Incubator when Laura Kiltrees was there. That's my tradition. Well, let's talk first of all about where we are in terms of, let's call it the multiple mentality of the country. With the virus, it's like we are on the 5-yard line, and the question is, will we fumble the ball and go all the way back to the 50-yard line and start over? So I think there's an interesting, again, cross-fertilization of people thinking about the future, saying that it's over on the one hand, and the science is saying that perhaps it is not over. As we all know, uncertainty has a lot to do with the economy. So when we combine the uncertainty, let's say the perceived certainty, if you will, with the market, then we see things opening back up, right? We see the stock market responding in different ways, but more importantly, we see the everyday enterprises that really support people responding in different ways. So let's talk about anticipation rather than where things are. We are anticipating, I am anticipating a two-headed monster. One monster is good, and that is, in Texas, at least, we're opening back up. And let me say that there are other states that have already opened back up, but we're doing it without masks, which is very, very interesting. And so the economy itself, that is the real economy of goods and services rather than the stock market, looks like it is about to rebound. People are excited, but within this two-headed monster, the question is, how will it come back? There was a great article in the Austin American Statesman that talked about, I wonder will the restaurant business come back like it was before? So I think the economy will bounce back. It's going to be uneven across the United States. As we like to say in Texas, we created 5 times the amount of jobs in any other state over the last 15 years. And it looks like the economy here is booming with entrepreneurs moving their firms here. So remember, Andreas, we're coming off an unprecedented time in American history. It's not a war, but certainly a pandemic is something we hadn't seen in 100+ years. So if you are in the economy where you can work at home, if you are not in the gig economy, life has been pretty good. If you are very wealthy, life has been extremely well with the stock market. But the other part of the two-headed economy is this. If the virus snatches us back to 5 or 6 months ago, then we have to worry again about the gig economy. On top of that, of course, we've had a change in administration. We're really looking at what's happening with 5G. We have a constant eye on China and 5G. We know that there was an instrument, an energy instrument, if you will, a big server, if you will, that was kind of intercepted by America from China in Houston. And it was full of sensors that would allow the Chinese to gather lots of information. So we in unprecedented ways, we think that the economy will boom in the future. If we look at interest rates, they are right where they want to be. But I worry about the mentality of the country and how we interact with what we call the future.
Got it. Thank you, Johnny. Llewelyn, what's your take? Where are we at?
I think we're in a much more precarious place than Johnny does. I think that there are lots of things that can go wrong, lots of things that are understandable. Even the expression bounce back is probably misleading. We're going to a new place. Post-pandemic will not be the place we were pre-pandemic. Some businesses will be permanently failed, as Johnny mentioned. There was an article in the local paper about will restaurants come back? A lot of them won't. They've been shuttered. Some of them, I've seen them around here, where the fixtures have been sold. They're not coming back. You'll probably see more chain restaurants and fewer private ones. It'll be a long time before people find the capital and the temerity to start again. Likewise, anybody who doesn't have a skill is going to be at a great disadvantage in the post-pandemic world. But if they have a skill, and it can be, not a highly regarded skill in the sense that a PhD in engineering is a highly regarded skill, it might be being a capable journeyman plumber or stonemason. Those people are going to be in great demand. The skill-less, the laborers, the people who go from job to job, which also includes, unfortunately, a lot of restaurant workers, a lot of hotel workers, in fact, pretty well across the hospitality industry, there is great uncertainty. I think the pace of digitization will continue. I think there's we also often hear talk about electric utilities. There are big questions over electric utilities and the reliability of supply. John mentioned the thing about Chinese in bulk power supply equipment, Chinese sensors possibly being buried in them. I've been writing about this solidly for a year. It's only just beginning to get some general traction, and it's alarming. The many things that could go wrong are alarming, but there are always many things that can go wrong. So we don't know. I also think we are part of a globalized economy, whether we like it or not. Price of oil going up overseas affects the price of oil here. And we're going to have to look at our infrastructure across the board. And the infrastructure includes the electric utility infrastructure, including what we generally think of the infrastructure, which is roads and bridges. And they're in deplorable condition. You can't actually drive easily down the East Coast of the United States. You will be in a traffic jam from Boston to somewhere south of Washington, and then you'll pick up another traffic jam as you get a bit further south. That's not efficient. That is a tremendous cost that we're paying. So we're going to have some real, I think, stimulus of the infrastructure economy, which will in due time pay dividends in the rest of the economy. Then there is the question about how fast we abandon precautions, as you have in Texas, regarding the pandemic. Extending the pandemic, which is what I think is going to happen in Texas, is not a good option. It's rather a bad option. And this is not encouraging. I'm sure it's been done because there's a general feeling it will speed the return of the economy, but it can also speed the return of new variants of the virus. So very uncertain time. And I think that we're going to come through it all right, but we have to be sensible. Assuming that somehow you're a chosen part of the economy or a chosen part of the nation and it won't happen to you is a terrible mistake, as you might say, of Texas utilities that went offline because of freezing equipment.
Yeah.
It's a terrible price. That price you're going to be paying in Texas for a long time. You're going to have cascading bankruptcies. You have Bravos went bankrupt, and there will be others.
Yeah, thank you. Tom, you have obviously a perspective of living in Texas, but more importantly, you have a global perspective as president and CEO of Itron with operations in all the continents. And so where are we at globally in the US, in your opinion?
Well, I don't know that I'm clever enough to add a lot more context than what we've already talked about here. I think it certainly from an economic perspective, it's the tale of two cities. There's certainly haves and have-nots, and that gap, if you will, continues to get broader and broader, and that's not helpful for anyone. across the board. There is a real need for stimulus to really move things in the right direction. Governments haven't quite found the wherewithal or the will to do it yet in a cohesive fashion. And it is that cohesive piece that I think is really the untapped territory for us as a planet to truly understand. When I look at it through the lens of the sustainability movement or ESG investing or climate kinds of things, we're starting, I think, as a society globally, get our feet underneath us, but still it's a bit fractured, which again, we can do much better when we do it together. And I'm hopeful as leaders in industry and governments, we can start to operate a bit more cohesively and reduce the divide and help the planet and help future generations.
Yeah. Now, well, as a follow-up, one would think that the event of the storm, which impacted actually 17 states dramatically, Texas just getting the headlines because Texas, is getting the headlines, but there were 17 states got, sort of impacted. Is it your historical perspective that this kind of events help the notion of utilities accelerating or getting more serious about automation and improving things? What's your take about what's the good that comes out of a storm like this for the improvement of infrastructure?
Lots to learn from the Texas event of the last couple of weeks overall. But if I'll give you two examples that I think are interesting to look at. How did we behave, or how did our customers, utilities and cities, behave as part of COVID, and what's likely to happen out of the storm of last week? So I'm forecasting a bit on the second is. Sure. But certainly from a COVID perspective, we saw customers far more interested in having discussions around automation of basic processes. Nobody wanted to have their employees out, roaming around the streets to read meters. If you can do it from behind a pane of glass, why not automate those types of things? When the work from home activity started for a lot of the economy, suddenly the loading on the grid changed. You didn't have the same loading in commercial real estate that you had, and residential went up, but it didn't go up nearly as much from an electricity load perspective as you saw it go down on the commercial side. So the classic shape of what the demand on the grid looked like, that you probably have seen at the duck curve, if you will, where electricity is high in the residential areas in one parts of the day, and then it moves to the downtown area and then back to the suburbs in the evening. But that notion of the duck curve loading was totally blown up. So now if you're an electricity utility, you're trying to think about things like balancing supply and demand. You want to make sure that you're as efficient as you possibly can on the generation side. You don't want to burn money by generating too much, but you got to have enough to cover it. If your demand profile is suddenly shifting rapidly, how do you balance that supply and demand to get the best economics and the right reliable service? You get more and more storms that happen across the globe. And okay, the Texas example, we can unpack that in a moment. But the fact of the matter is that the rate of natural disasters has gone up by 4x per year since the 1970s. And you read about it in the news every day: wildfires in California or in Australia, floods in Europe or the Midwest, hurricanes in the Gulf region. No part of the planet is truly immune to these types of things. And that means that utilities are increasingly under pressure to provide reliable and robust services. So how do they improve resiliency and reliability in the face of more and more natural disasters? So whether the natural disaster is a flood, a hurricane, a winter storm, a wildfire, or a pandemic, it's a real pressure on the utilities, where they are much more willing to invest in new technology to help with that reliability. They want to automate business processes. How do you get better insight into the grid, reduce losses? All of these things are in some ways really good business for us. That's really what we do, is help utilities with those types of things, which it makes the future bright from an Itron perspective. But from a societal view, there's lots to be done and much we can help with.
Yeah. One other follow-up real quick. It seems like we have been talking about this since March, when the lockdowns started happening last year. It's been a year now. Amazing. Time flies when you're having fun, lockdown. That COVID has accelerated the digitization and digitalization of many things, right? A lot of things that perhaps were in the back burner and people were thinking about have come to the forefront in an accelerated pace. And it seems to me that for the grid in particular, this storm has really, highlighted a lot of the weaknesses of the grid itself. And so what's your feeling about what happened in Texas and the notion that, they answered a lot of people, and I wrote about it in 2011 in my book for the first time, virtual power plants is the answer, right? And so you are in the middle of that journey for all the things that you sell with your analytical software and all your systems. And what is that talk accelerating? Are people really wanting to jump into the virtual power plant? Where is that going?
I think that I see many solutions to the problem. So microgrids, virtual power plants, micro storage, demand response, energy efficiency programs, better monitoring, better outage management. There's no one right answer that I've seen. It's very situational dependent in terms of what is the situation on the ground. But it all starts with truly understanding what the situation on the ground really is, and the visibility sadly is very, very low. So it is a case where the more we can really mine all of the data that exists from an Itron perspective, just utilizing the treasure trove that comes out of an AMI system to understand what's happening points the way to what are viable and cost-effective solutions. We can make far more reliable when we use the information that we have. So coming to your point, I see a much more willingness for people to invest in, damn, we got to figure this out. And that realization is there. We've got to turn it into true action. The Texas case is a little early to declare, but even during COVID, we've seen a good movement and acceleration in the types of automation solutions that I'm talking about.
Yeah. Llewelyn or John, a question for Tom?
Well, yeah, Tom, how do you see storage coming? One of the lessons of Texas, of course, was storage would help a lot. And storage at the point of use probably is a lot more valuable than storage at some distance. And yet all the storage we see today is batteries. If you put aside pump storage and the old way of doing it, you have batteries which have a drawdown of 4 hours. Are we going to see a battery that will survive, say, 2 days of drawdown? Or are we going to have to look at something else? CPS Energy in San Antonio is looking for 900 megawatts of new solar and something to back it up. And there really isn't anything unless they put in gas turbines, it seems to me. Now they've got a very big RFP out and they may get some brilliant ideas, but it still seems to be very hard to say that you can back up in any way except with fossil fuels 900 megawatts of solar.
The storage is definitely getting better and better, so that there are new technologies that are available, some at I'll call it the industrial level and some almost at the residential level. So that the notion of a Tesla Powerwall in your garage or a large storage facility to do something like you're mentioning with CPS Energy. In both cases, the challenge there is getting the economics right. So you can build it, it's too expensive to be practical today. Getting better and better with time, but it's still pretty difficult in just a raw capacity kind of sense. During COVID, we saw people running part of their households on their power walls. So that in terms of what happens inside of the notion, that inside the building itself, a residential kind of environment. But there's also a real complication with how you manage all of that on the grid itself. If suddenly loads are dropping in and out, and you're running your household on your local storage, and when that goes flat, your house goes back on the grid. How does the grid operator tend to cope with all of that? So again, insight into what is happening in the grid with storage, which is getting better and better, and the economics are coming along, but still a bit challenging, and probably takes us a few more years as an industry to achieve it. But you've got to invest in the insight and the analytics to understand it, the control piece of it, as well as the storage. So it's a three-pronged attack to make it really practical and useful.
Tom, the virtual utility is going to need to have an enormous amount of actionable, I mean, instantly, in milliseconds, actionable data. That's where you come in, right?
Well, certainly we are a part of the solution, and certainly we're working hard to become a bigger and bigger piece of that. So truly understanding what's happening on the distribution grid is an important part of that. Understanding what's happening in the last mile is an extraordinarily important piece of it, and balancing supply and demand, where we play in just one piece of that. But understanding that full picture is going to be incredibly important. There is a need for edge compute. So you've got to be able to do some of the computing down at the edge, and you've got to do some of it centralized. I think you're going to need a certain amount of AI and ML, artificial intelligence and machine learning kinds of capability to make sense of it fast enough to really, really be actionable. Moving around the kind of loads that we're talking about is not for the faint of heart. And if you get it wrong, you turn yourself into some of the situations that we've seen or potentially could have seen in Texas just last week if you're not careful. But how do we do that collectively as an industry? And okay, I'm talking about one state, which is maybe 50 to 70 gigawatts of total energy. You want to do that at the country level. It's a really complicated problem.
Tom, I think it's complicated because with the grid, it's a public-private partnership. Public-private partnership. And we know that the grid management moves with glacier speeds. It's not like we're dealing with a new company like a Freescale that can switch on a dime. So my question is, can we do this as a public-partner relationship? Has the grid manufacturers and indeed those individuals who control the grid shown that they cannot adopt the technologies that's sitting on the shelf now? Yeah. Is it true that perhaps it would be a company like a Google who would have lots and lots of customers, or another company like a Microsoft with lots and lots of companies who would come in and purchase wholesale and then sell to their consumers at retail? So the big question, when you look at tech transfer or the movement of technology, all of the things that you talk about has been on the shelf. AI has been on the shelf to improve the grid, that is from the power station to the grid edge and then to the home. All of that is there to collect the data. But as I like to say, if you're dealing with a technology that's ancient and is still producing great revenue, why should you change? So my question is, can we get there with the present structure that we have? Do we have to be more active in terms of private enterprises who would come in and understand how technology can change business models? Because all of the data collection, all of the mechanisms, all of the AI, it is there. So you look at the grid is where the computers were 50 years ago, right? And so all of that stuff is now smart. Microsoft can load down anything and et cetera. So what's your take on business model and a grid management that refuses to see the future and take advantage of everything that's sitting on the shelf?
Yeah, I certainly have my share of frustrations with the pace of change. You're right. If there's technology available today to do a lot more than we are doing, there is a regulatory model and there's a public-private partnership piece of it that we as business leaders and hopefully the political arena and the regulatory arena can get together and move it along a little bit faster. I see steady movement. If I just think about it from a regulatory perspective, the number of states in the US today that have performance-based regulatory models rather than a fixed recovery model, or the number of states that are having reasonable discussions about capitalization of things like software as a service or network as a service is just, light and day different from 5 years ago. So moving that forward is really important. Providing a framework for equal access to all parts of the economy, from the lowest income to the highest income, and making sure that access is equal. is indeed possible, but it's going to take real cooperation to move the needle and moving along a little bit faster than what we've demonstrated to this point. From an Itron perspective, spending a lot of time with organizations like NARUC and FERC and the utility commissions to understand and really try to lay out and explain what the technology can do. And really trying to partner is how we try to advance it. So I think it's really about us as a society to get on with it and make sure we're keeping all the constituents in mind. We want it to be fair and we want it to be reasonable. We don't want anyone taken for a ride from a regulatory perspective or a cost recovery perspective, but we've got to get on with using the technology we have to make people's lives a little bit easier and a little bit better.
Yeah, let me pause real quick, Johnny, and come back. Let me take my quick break, couple of seconds here to thank our sponsors, remind everybody of the Digital 360 Summit 2021. We have new dates, August 31st, September 1st, September 2nd, face-to-face. And it's going to be 100 speakers, 400 companies. We're doing 2 awards this year, a showcase, shooting for 1,000 attendees, an invitation-only event. So sponsors play a key role on the event happening. It'll be 20 keynotes and 14 panels. And the focus are all those verticals that really make this infrastructure happen into a single digital world. And we want to thank the companies that participated in last year's event and looking forward to this coming year. And we want to thank Texas State University for sponsoring the Digital-Roundtable. And with that said, let me come back. Johnny, you had a follow-up question?
I did have a follow-up. Do you think that the technology can be so complicated, much like the airplane? Right. So we have lots of technology, and we know that flight is really is much safer traditionally. And then we have something like the 737 MAX or whatever have you. And Llewelyn is a pilot, and I was wondering that in that industry, sometimes the pilots would say that, well, the technology is becoming too complicated. Can we get to the point with the grid where the technology itself has overwhelmed the ability for the grid to do its job? Or shall we move on, press on, and really, really complicate things in terms of taking care of the uncertainty and animating everything, where it becomes so complicated that the average PhD in engineering cannot understand it, because AI is learning by itself? That was my follow-up question.
Sure. I'm not sure that I see it as a clear choice of A or B. I think that building in resiliency and reliability, building in safeguards, utilizing the technology, but always having a switch there, that allows oversight is important overall. But the very nature of the grid, the decentralized way that it tends to operate today, and water systems and gas systems, exactly the same thing, creates a certain amount of redundancy that generally serves well. That is I think part of the safeguards that need to happen. So I think utilizing more and more technology to provide insight and reliability, making sure we build redundancy into the grid, I think you really can have both. In the case of using the 737 MAX, I'm far from an expert on it, but my perspective on it was much more about making sure that quality reliability checks are done in the development process, making sure you're really thinking through those and keeping your test organization as separate to really understand how things go together is an important lesson there. I'm not here to cast dispersion on Boeing or anyone else, but when we think about this from a development perspective, having those checks and balances, having those safeguards and that redundancy built into mission critical systems is a good lesson for all of us, and planning for wider and wider use cases. So the Texas example from last week, no one really ever planned on exactly cold weather coming to the entire state of Texas and lasting for 5 or 6 days, and doing it at a time when you had 14 or 15 or 16 gigawatts of generation capability offline and not having the redundancy that is normally built into the grid. The notion of the perfect storm, okay, well, I suppose you could argue this was it, but I think that planning for wider and wider disparate use cases and more of these types of events is going to happen, whether you are blaming it fully on climate change or not. You're going to have these things, so we need to plan for it and start to build that capability into our mission critical systems.
Yeah, real quick, Tom, before we leave Texas, I don't know if you have any early notions of recommendations or insights, but you have tons of customers in Texas, Centerpoint and CPS Energy and many others, and so you have assets and things on the ground here. Any insights into what should be done and what is Itron ready to help increase the efficiency of the grid in Texas?
Sure. So we saw our customers trigger some pretty large scale DR demand response events, shed the load, that was an area. So we see our DR solutions worked exactly as they were planned to do. We saw that from several of our big customers, including right here in my hometown as well, where it was done. We saw the network performance. If I use CPS as an example, we could detect the outages and understand what had happened if a particular sector went down unintentionally or even intentionally. Network performance remained good. So the notion of a mesh network served the entire population of what we work with really well. We were short on the generation side, which certainly caused the bigger problems. On the transmission side, there were certainly lessons learned and things that we see that our customers will do with additional automation. But in general, I was super pleased with the response of our systems during the event.
Great. So Tom, real quick, as we move around the things that we track, right? We track several key trends in the transformation of technology, which is our focus, digital transformations. And as I said earlier, COVID and events like the snow polar vortex really accelerate this digitalization journey. So give us a sense real quick on telecom and IoT, which is one of your big backgrounds. A lot of people are talking about private LTE, private 5G, private networks, not the carrier networks. People are talking about LoRaWAN. I know that you're a founding member of Wi-Sun, which is the next version of RF mesh on steroids. Where is this all going? And I assume that Itron is no longer a one-trick pony, but really, you will embrace any technology, and you have been for a while now. So where is this going as we go from a billion things talking to 100 billion things talking, and primarily those will be industrial things using Itron stuff?
Right. So I think you nailed the first trend that I would talk about is there isn't one way to do this. So you've got to use the right horse for the right course overall. So I think that the network of the future, the solution of the future for IoT or industrial IoT is not one transport mechanism. It's going to be a combination of a lot of different technologies to be able to work. Interoperability and the companies that are truly going to win in this world are people that can make sense of all of that data. So if you have something from mesh and LoRaWAN and a 5G cellular connection and PLC, power line carrier, being able to grab all of that data and present it in a useful fashion to make sense of it is really going to be the key to success. I think all of the different technologies that you and I just rattled off, they have their place in the universe. Economic reality is that many of them probably don't make it all the way, and you start to get some volume aggregation over time, but there will always be new challengers, and it's important to be able to, especially in the utility industry, to be able to harness that and carry things forward. I do see things like private LTE replacing some of the WiMAX solutions that are kind of going away in the battery operated world. Certainly in Europe, there's a space for LoRaWAN types of things. It hasn't been terribly successful in the US just yet. 5G is coming. It's certainly 5G is a bit more prevalent, I would say, on the consumer side than it is on the industrial side. You've got to start somewhere. But certainly as growth in smartphones starts to flatten out and there's a need to be able to monetize those technologies, it will come to more industrially oriented fixed network types of applications across the board. So the key in my mind is getting a supply chain in place for the underlying technologies, the chipset and software that it takes to make that modem and do that at scale. That's an expensive proposition and something that a couple of companies are going to win out in that space. So watching those volumes in terms of the users of it, making sure that you're able to work with different transport mechanisms and aggregate the data itself, and staying flexible is going to be important. The last point I guess I would make is because of all of that churn, if you will, in terms of new technologies coming up, which is not bad churn, it's a good thing, that the need to be agile in terms of what new use cases you are making available. So from a utility perspective, their traditional business models are really breaking down. They used to buy a certain technology and stick it in the ground and amortize the cost over 10 or 20 years. And that model, in terms of the regulatory model, served the industry really, really well. You got a good rate of return as an investor. You got stable technology as a user. Great. But you knew what you were going to do with the technology from the moment you purchased it. In today's world, you don't know what you need a year from now. And how do you create agility for the utilities in terms of their business model? And I think the notion that we think a lot about is distributed intelligence. So put some edge computing at the edge of the network and be able to download different applications into it to make it take on a different personality and provide different sets of data. That agility allows you to invest in a capability and use it in different ways. We see our customers doing that today, and I think that will absolutely be the way of the future. It is part of the solution to what we talked about earlier, is that public-private partnership. How do we use the technology? How do we keep control of it when we do? It is that downloadable application and edge computing capability that will be super important.
Excellent. Llewelyn?
Well, I think that I agree totally with what Tom said. I think there's certain large issues which computers basically present, one of which we never deal with, or which tends to be brushed off by people in the digital world, and that is privacy, the changed nature of the individual in relation to society, and it is quite a radical change. I do think we need ways, breakpoints to disengage. Utility companies, we're talking about those, they need to be able to escape the grid at some time quickly and efficiently, and that has to be built into quite a lot of things we do. As we get more and more interconnected, and I think we saw this in the freeze in Texas, that the interconnection didn't necessarily help. It might have in some instances, and it hindered in others. So as Tom said, you've got to think up all the parts of something. And I think, and I've said this on this broadcast previously, the best way is to let each individual culture within a system develop its own solutions, but it has to speak to the rest of the system. And utilities suffer from legacy. This is what Johnny goes on about. And many companies suffer from legacy. This is the way we've done it. And utilities have the additional defense that we keep the lights on. We're real-time operators. We don't have time to experiment or to go on to try something new. And that's a big problem with utilities. And as to not adopting new technologies, Johnny, absolutely. I used to give speeches for the Electric Power Research Institute years ago, And I would speak to the TICs, the Technical Information Coordinators, and I knew what they were going to ask me before I went in the room. And it was always the same. I may have mentioned this before. How can we get our utilities to adopt the things we have invented on their behalf and which they have paid, but they don't want to do? Whether it was a better insulator on a pole, a computer system, or a better pole. I mean, you know, it is quite extraordinary how conservative utilities have been in some aspects of their work. Around here in New England, we see some marvelous bits of urban sculpture in the utility poles that lean and you know, defy gravity in various ways. If you walk around a European or Japanese city, you don't see that because it's undergrounded. It's gone away. It's not visible. We have constant battles with vegetation. Well, some countries have dealt with vegetation by getting off the limits of wooden poles and going higher, and others have undergrounded, and I'm not advocating any of these, but it does seem to me that we're not doing anything about it except vegetation control, which means getting into people's gardens every 2 years and chopping down their ornamental trees, which doesn't work in Washington, D.C. because the high percentage of lawyers there who want to sue you. So instead of that, people lose power regularly because they won't have the trees cut and the utilities haven't another solution. They need to be more innovative, but also we need to be more respectful of the day in, day out job, which they do remarkably well. Going forward, they have to do something about resiliency. You can't have a smart city with power breaks in it. You simply can't. And there's something wrong that utilities all over the country advocate that you get some water and some batteries because the wind is going to be very high.
Yeah.
Well, that's not a solution. There has to be a better solution. Otherwise, you're not going to have the kind of interconnected smart city or progressive city that we've talked about here. It's going to be a big inhibitor to evolution of cities and other things in our lives if we cannot rely on having power at all times.
Johnny?
One of the things that you're right, I absolutely agree that we're talking about here is what I like to call the signal and the noise. That is, you look at the Internet of Things and how we're dependent upon the data to really take us to the future. That is the whole idea, the more we can have information and project the future, the better we'll be. Because this brings into the equation the old idea of garbage in data, garbage out. And of course, I'm an old statistician. We don't call it statistics now. We call it data science. We call it other things, but it is the same old, regression toward the mean. So one of the questions we have to really answer, Tom, and I want you to get your reaction to this, but all of the data that the Internet of Things will produce, and to me, it's just a data set. When the doors open, it's a data set. When the lights come on, it's a data set. What would be the quote, let me get academic here, the theory that would guide the development of the equations as we go forward? What do we need to teach data scientists? Is it true that data scientists will be one of the most interesting, dynamic, and sought after occupations in the Internet of Things? So I work with data sets all the time, but how do you take all the data and get the signal out of the noise? What's your thoughts on that? This is what you do?
Yeah, it is, in my mind, it comes down, and I'm going to oversimplify for the effect, it's pattern recognition is really what is the key in all of that. Depending on the type of application, it is absolutely a different pattern that you're looking for. And the same set of data, when you're looking for different things, can produce wildly different results depending on the pattern matching that you're working on. So it is in the case of the public data or the private data that we're talking about is two sides of the same coin. So who's got access to the data? How do we handle the privacy concerns associated with it? Do you really want everyone to know, how many gallons of water you used and how many watts of electricity you used? But if it helps make the grid more resilient and reliable, perhaps that is data that needs to be available. So you get different views on the data, a different pattern that you're thinking about, and different privacy concerns depending on where in the chain that you sit. It's going to be an interesting battle, and it's going to be back to our conversation about working together, public, private, enterprise, and regulatory, the political arena, coming together to really create the solution set that we want. Any solution set that you can come up with is going to have different detractors and potential different pitfalls to watch out for.
Yeah.
In my world, that's watching the correlation. You call it data matching, I call it correlation.
Same thing. So yeah, we should talk about my graduate work in pattern recognition one time. So you know, how to dock the space shuttle. That's a good problem to solve.
Good problem. Okay, I'm sorry, Andrew.
No, you're good. You're good. So when I created CMG in 2014, I came up with the opening diagram that shows utilities, smart utilities, electric, power, gas, smart buildings, and smart cities. And those worlds used to be totally separate worlds with all kinds of different protocols and realities and use cases and ownership types and vendors and so on. But as time has gone on, those worlds are colliding every day. And interestingly enough, Itron is probably one of the few pure plays that is in the middle of that coalition. Tom, what's your take on the fact that everything that you do for a service territory utility, which, you know, in the case of Austin Energy has, you know, some 10 cities underneath it. You know, CPS Energy manages, you know, hundreds of cities. Somebody like National Grid manages thousands of cities underneath as customers. And the technologies that you sell to that utility can actually be leveraged to improve or reduce or enhance that digital challenge that they are all having. What's your take on that, and where is the world going about understanding that this digitalization investment needs to be rethought and leveraged farther than just one customer and one kind of access point at a time? What's your take on that?
We have seen tremendous progress in just the last couple of years. So I'll use the city of San Antonio and CPS. So we did the electricity AMI project just to do the two-way meter reading on the electricity piece with CPS. That's where it started. But during the last year, we used that same network to read the water meters with the sister utility SAWS, the San Antonio water system. So build it once, use it multiple times. And now there's 5 or perhaps 6 different applications that are running on that same network. That usage of the common asset is good for the community. It's good for the businesses. It's good for Itron. It's all around goodness, where you can do smart city applications. You can do things like street lights and parking sensors and air quality detection. You can read water meters and gas meters and electricity meters to be able to reuse the same asset. They are sister utilities. We've done it with other places where the water utility is not at all connected, but it's underlying an electricity utility, Washington County and AEP network to be able to read water meters underneath the electricity network. That same notion, same network for distribution automation and meter reading, that being able to reuse the asset multiple times is very cost effective and a super value proposition for the community, for the customer. And we think it's obviously innovative from an Itron perspective. So the notion of people, utilities really utilizing and reaching that digital state is far more a reality today than it was just a couple of years ago, and it continues to pick up steam. It's supported from the regulatory case today. It's supported by the politicians because it's good for the community itself, and of course it's good business for the utility and for Itron. So it's a win-win-win for everyone, and it's something that's really picked up steam. So more to be done with the technology, but really fun stuff. Really fun stuff.
Go ahead, Johnny.
The reason why I like it is because the physical network and a biological network and a social network all look alike. Isn't that fantastic? That is, if you look at what you learn from your network analysis, it's the same thing that we learned from the spread of cancer in the body. So the biological network for the spread of cancer, when we solve the problem, look just like your network that you're using in different kind of situations. So I have a good English friend who wrote a book entitled "The Network is Everything." So as Andreas just said, look, all of this stuff is combining. I mean, I do research on network analysis, business network analysis, and the literature that I'm reading is from biology. It's how biological networks do in the body. So as we combine from a knowledge point of view and understand that a biological network, a physical network, and a social network, when you print it out, it all looks the same. And then you can find the different kind of problems of where you have to attack in the same kind of way. So therefore, as Andrea said, all of this stuff is combining and is very, very interesting, and it's all network analysis. So my question is, do you learn from other networks rather than the networks that you're engaged in? Do you have somebody in shop that's looking at biological networks and physical networks and neural networks, et cetera?
I am a great believer in learning from nature for sure. So I can't claim that we stole our ideas with a direct correlation, but the idea of thinking about how these things could be reused, that reuses the technology and could learn from one another is alive and well across the board. So you're clever to think about it from a human body perspective. That's a connection that I haven't made, but I often draw parallels from my days in the cellular and telecom world to how things are evolving just today in the utility space. There's a lot to be learned from the growth and the proliferation of smartphones and how that played out applied to the utility sector of today and of the next decade.
Yeah, Llewelyn?
Well, I think there's a lot to be learned everywhere. I think one of the things you may come up against is when society thinks that instinctively feels, and maybe incorrectly, I'm not defending society when it makes these decisions, but that it's gone far enough with a particular technology. We saw that obviously with the Concorde. There wasn't enough demand for that airplane. People didn't really want to go across the Atlantic in 3.5 hours. And there was no sense when the program was abandoned of great loss or deprivation that we hadn't gone there and hadn't done it. And I think if you think about it, there are all sorts of things which seemed like a wonderful way to go, but didn't happen. I wonder when the digital world is going to run into these unseen but possible impediments to its relentless growth. We don't want everything we think we want as much as we thought we wanted it. And these decisions are made in society. They're made in very obtuse ways, but nonetheless very powerful ways. And I wonder how long we can continue on down this racetrack of digitization till there is a kind of whoa sets in. I wonder what you think about that.
I think that there's an economic component to it, which is in some ways a relentless force that pushes things forward. There's a societal component to it, which is how far is too far, how much data privacy or how much of your public data do you want out there. So there's a societal piece to it, and those can be opposing forces. I'll be honest, I think we have a long way to go in the industrial space to really embrace a digital world before we're close enough to even see the edge of the piece that we're talking about on this front. So I'm still optimistic that that we've got a ways to go before we've reached a point where we see how far is too far. That said, there is a point where it's too far, but we're not all that close just yet.
And what is the power? What is the place and the power of just a better idea? There are lots of products out there that are just a better idea. And often that's the solution to what seems like a very complicated problem. The Sony Walkman, when it came along, was very simple. It took a radio that people were carrying on their heads off and put it somewhere else. Done easy once it's been done, but not so easy before it's been done. Steve Jobs thought that computers didn't have to be that dirty throw-up kind of color they all were at one time. That was a better idea. Or the one that I love is cup holders in cars, cup holders in vehicles. There were no cup holders. Then 7-Eleven or one of the convenience chains decided you could get a little plastic thing which was scientifically designed. If you made a mistake and put the window down to dump scalding coffee on your soft parts.
The best of all was putting.
And suddenly the auto manufacturers realized that cup holders were very important in cars. They weren't in carriages, they weren't in the 19th century. And overnight, cup holders were the thing. Cup holders in cars, cup holders in boats. I mean, it is as though the world had been deprived of this invention, which was the dumbest invention you could have, but it hadn't been done. And I wonder, in your world of high tech, of terribly sophisticated technology, where a better idea just jumps in and makes a big difference.
User convenience, making it easy for the user to adopt it and making it useful is much more important than the sophistication of the technology. Just because it's better doesn't mean that it flies. You could use a VHS versus Betamax, or an OS2 versus Windows, or the roadway is littered with many cases where better doesn't mean that it wins, but it is convenience, its distribution, its availability of the technology that I think is the key. So because it can doesn't mean it should. Making it really solve a user's problem is the key to adoption.
Llewelyn, you missed the wheels on luggage. I'm surprised that you missed the wheels on
well,
luggage.
I know about the wheels on luggage. I didn't want to mention them because I mentioned them on this program previously. In 1969, we got a man on the moon, and in 1970, somebody put wheels on luggage, and that was more revolutionary than the person on the moon. The moon.
They got rid of all of the luggage handlers in airports. They always, you had to
You
tip
scratch your head and say, why didn't they put wheels on luggage previously?
Because we were solving the wrong problem. We were trying to make the suitcase lighter because it was too heavy to carry everything. So how do we make it lighter?
Absolutely.
We solved the wrong problem. The problem is how do you move it rather than how much it weighs. But never mind. I digress. I digress.
No, I enjoyed the digression.
I'm happy to say that this conversation has been phenomenal, and unfortunately we're out of time. But I would be remiss if I wouldn't say that Itron deciding to promote Tom Deitrich from Chief Operating Officer to CEO has been a spectacular ride. When he joined, when he started as CEO, I believe the stock was trading around $70. It's now trading at $122. He's basically doubled the market cap of the company more than double, from $2 billion to $5 billion today. And they are for sure one of the few pure plays of this whole smart building, smart utility, smart city. So Tom, congratulations on everything you're doing.
You're very kind. Thank you. Thank you. Lots of good people, and I wish I could take credit for it, but it's the team behind that really makes it happen.
Oh, it certainly takes a village, no doubt.
A good village.
You guys are doing all the right things, and I'm excited that we know you, and we wish you continued success and look forward to meeting again in the future. Any parting thoughts, Johnny or Llewelyn?
I enjoyed the discussion. I think we really must push the discussion on grid edge development and technology grids going forward. And I think it's going to be a bigger relationship with private enterprise that does this. And the pandemic has caused lots of business models to change, as Tom so eloquently pointed out.
Likewise. I think grid edge is going to be very, very important. And I think in 10 years, the grid will look very different from what it looks like today, with or without a huge drive, another force that utilities are dealing, which is decarbonization. That is a big force, along with reliability.
Yeah. Look forward to meeting again, Tom. Any final thoughts and takeaways?
My thoughts are only thank you so much for having me, the engaging discussion, and I look forward to continuing to learn and listen to future episodes. This was great fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for being here. Johnny, you'd like to take us away?
It's a pleasure to meet you, Tom.
Living on the road, my friend, is gonna keep you free and clean. And now you wear your skin like iron. Your voice is hard as kerosene. What your mama's only son, but her favorite one, it seemed. She began to cry when you said goodbye. And sank into your dreams.